Chapter 2. Devil's Canyon. I laid there under the trailer on the side of the road, pinned and helpless, in body, mind, and spirit. Just then, like some winged demon, a black-winged stealth bomber soared across the light of the moon. It startled me as its silhouette appeared out of the darkness for a brief second, disappearing again in its descent to nearby Vandenberg Air Force Base. It shook me out of my spell of despair, and I sucked in my gut, pulled the fairing back with all the strength I could muster, and squeezed the rest of my body under the trailer. It was pitch black under there. The fairings blocked out any moonlight, and I couldn't see the undercarriage or the driveline, even though it was just a few inches above my head. I got out my trusty pocket flashlight and stuck it in my mouth, laid flat on my back, and scooted myself along the driveline to where the yoke inserted into the transmission. I was shocked to see its girth. Most drive shafts were maybe 6 or 7 inches in diameter. This anaconda was a solid 1.5 feet thick. I removed the bolts from the U-joint, wrapped my arms around it, and tried to pull the shaft from the slip yoke. It wouldn't budge. I'd have to hammer it out. I scooted myself back across the rocky ground, smashed myself under the fairing, went to the tool compartment at the back of the wrecker, and got a sledgehammer. Dragged it, a ratchet strap 5 inches thick, and myself back under the fairing. I wrapped the ratchet strap around the drive shaft and through a steel beam that was part of the frame of the trailer, laid on my side, and awkwardly slammed the sledgehammer to the side of the drive shaft in an attempt to free it from the transmission. I pounded and pounded, again and again, sweat pouring from under my beanie into my eyes, which were tearing with frustration, my arms tired and failing. It seemed like no matter how hard I struck down on the shaft, it hardly made a dent or moved out of place a single inch. Still, I had to prevail. I had come too far, worked too hard to quit. I was furious. I was turning into that sledgehammer. It was an extension of my hatred and rage. Like a bull's horn stabbing into a toreador's spine, I slammed and banged until it finally gave way and began to slip out. For every 20 strikes, it would move out another inch. My flashlight was still clenched in my teeth. It was growing dimmer, its light fading for being on for so long. Finally, after what seemed like a million strikes of the hammer, I could sense that it was nearly out. I got under it and gave it one more awkward bang. It slid out and slammed down on my chest. It was heavy and crushed me under its weight, but I laughed and hugged it like a big, greasy black Labrador, my eyes filled with the fire of victory. I tightened the ratchet strap around the shaft and secured it to the frame of the trailer, dragged my weary bones from under the fairing for the last time, only to realize then that it was dawn. The shark-eye moon gone now, the sun sharp and blinding coming up over the green rolling hills. I was sweaty and sore, my eyes burning red as I stared into the new morning light. I double and triple checked all of my connections and the wheel lift to be safe, packed away all the tools into their bins, and prepared myself for the long journey back home. My fingers were chilled to the bone as I climbed back into the cab of the wrecker. I started the engine and let it warm up, turning the heater on full blast, and warmed my hands against the dash vents. The sun was up and shining into the cab, warming my face. I peeled out of a couple of layers down to just the long-sleeve thermal and t-shirt. I took off my beanie and put on a pair of sunglasses to lessen the glare, hitting my still adjusting eyes. I looked back through the rearview mirror to my left and gasped at all the truck I was about to tow down that windy mountain road, and stared slack-jawed and confounded. It seemed a mile long. The driver was still snoring the morning away in his sleeper. I hadn't heard a peep from him all night. I cracked my knuckles, then my neck, stretched my back, and adjusted myself into a comfortable position. My hands were shaking, not from the cold this time, but from fear. I shoved the shifter into first, revved the engine high, pushed the dash valves in to release the brakes. The weight of the car hauler was palpable immediately. I heard groaning metal sounds and felt its mass dragging us downhill. I jammed harder into the gas pedal, letting my foot off the clutch altogether. I had to make a U-turn and start back down the hill. The traffic had picked up with morning commuters making their way into Santa Barbara, so I waited for a clearing and started the turnaround. The road was narrow, and I had to swing as wide as possible and use every inch of road to make the turn. I had full view of the length of this monstrosity to my left as I wrapped around and started my descent. I saw the tail of this dragon as it straightened out and followed me, its sheer mass and gravity bearing down on my back. My knuckles were pure white and bone as I clenched the wheel, still in first gear, the engine revving extremely high in a piercing squeal. We started to accelerate at an alarming rate. I stood with both feet on the brake and pushed all my weight onto it. It was barely slowing us down, much less stopping us. I didn't relent. I pushed the brakes all the way to the floor in a panic, still holding the wheel steady and keeping a sharp eye on the road ahead of me. After about a good 600 yards, we began to slow. And in another 300, pulling to the side of the road, we came to a slow, grinding stop. That would not do at all. I was beginning to think that my wrecker could in no way be the proper vehicle to tow this beast in one whole piece. That a better plan of action would be to have Swift Transportation send a new tractor to tow the trailers to their destination and have me tow just the broken-down tractor back to their yard. My head was swimming as I dialed Raul to update him on the situation. He picked up, and I pled my case. Boss, it's just too heavy. It took me a good quarter mile to bring it to a complete stop. If there is traffic stopped around one of these bends, there is no way I'd be able to stop it in time. I'd destroy everything in my path. Dude, there won't be any traffic up there. You'll be fine, said Raul, as I watched car after car, in bunches at times, speeding by my open window. More, it seemed, by the minute. Just write it down in first and second gear. It's going to be fine. I'm sure the roads are wide open. How could he possibly know that? I thought to myself. The fact of the matter was, there was no way to know. Through one of those black tunnels, around one sharp turn or another, there could be a stalled-out truck, a car with a flat, a lane closed for construction, or just commuter traffic. And if so, I came barreling down and couldn't stop in time, it would mean a very sad and terrible holiday season for some poor family. Get this tow, Chris, exclaimed Raul. Just think about how much money you've made so far. By the time you're done, you'll probably have around 16 or 17 hours on this call. That's a lot of money, my man, for you and the company. I did the math with what little brain power I could muster after having pounded that drive shaft all night. It would be enough to cover most of my rent, just from this one tow. And either way, what choice did I have at that point? There was obviously no way Raul was going to call Swift and fess to not being able to carry out their request, not with so many more potential jobs on the line. I'll tell you what, man. I'm going to drive up and see how your hookup looks. By the time you get down the mountain, I should be in Santa Barbara. Just make your way down the road, and I'll wave you down when I see you. If there's any problems, I'll take over. With that, he hung up. I sat there for a minute, getting my nerve up and resting my tired eyes. My eyes popped open in terror when I heard a loud knocking on the driver's side door. I looked down to see a CHP officer, short, cropped hair, Filipino or Cambodian maybe. Holy fuck, you scared the shit out of me, I balked. Your rear end is blocking traffic. Get this thing moving now. I looked back and realized that I hadn't gotten the entire back end all the way off to the side of the road. It was still blocking half the lane. It was do or die at that point. The whole universe, it seemed, was intent on forcing me down that mountain. Horns honking, the cop's snarling, menacing face, the winding road, Raoul's manic conquest to conquer the towing market and build his empire. My hand was forced. I pushed in the dash valves to release the brakes, popped into first gear, and let her roll. The tunnels came up on me quickly, blinding me at first. My sunglasses made it especially dark in there, my neck bending and spying around every sharp turn for signs of slowing or stopped traffic. Commuters behind me honking and flashing their beams at me to go faster so they could get to their mind-numbing, miserable jobs on time. I didn't let it phase my concentration. There was no room for that, or error. After what seemed like 100 miles of nail-biting twists and turns, but was only actually 15 or so, I got down to Highway 1 and level ground. I transitioned onto the Ventura Freeway and saw the ocean, blue now, foaming white and misty and reflecting the warming yellow sun. The beaches were empty but for a few joggers and seagulls. I wasn't doing more than 20 to 25 miles per hour. I cruised along in the slow lane, taking in the warmth of it all, breathing in the salty air and playing the radio loud. I heard loud honking again and figured it was just another disgruntled commuter. I didn't even bother looking over to acknowledge him, but it persisted. I glanced out the window to shoot him an angry glare, only to realize that it was Raoul. He looked clean and rested, riding alongside me in his new shiny Super Duty pickup, tricked out with chrome wheels and a new coat of wax on the paint. He honked and laughed and gave me a thumbs up and pointed me forward with approval for a job well done, then sped off ahead of me, leaving me to complete the rest of the journey back unsupervised and alone. I guess I didn't mind. I always preferred to be left alone when working. I didn't like bosses hanging over my shoulder while I was slaving away. Work was an indecent enough endeavor without having to be supervised while suffering through it. To avoid the scales going back home, I got off the 101 at Santa Clara Avenue to where it becomes Los Angeles Avenue and cut up through Moore Park. It was the first time I'd ever driven through it. Moore Park is an old farming community with vast, fragrant orange groves, avocado groves, flower farms, and tree nurseries. I cruised slowly past the migrant workers laboring in the fields, bent over picking strawberries and cutting lettuce, adorned with wide straw hats and towels across their necks, shielding them from being burned in the sun. They were working even harder than I was, though their faces were cheerful and laughing. I passed many fruit stands, shady and quaint, selling cherries, nectarines, and freshly picked corn. There were flower stands and a roadside petting zoo with pygmy goats, a llama, and some chickens. The goats were built a wooden playground of ramps and stairs that let them climb on the roof of their stable. Many young children threw feed pellets into their enclosure, making them gather and bleat and leap over each other for their afternoon snack. There were old abandoned barns and stables sitting in the midst of immense rows of onion fields, being soaked over by sprinklers, misting in the warm air. Eucalyptus trees lined the road, casting soothing shadows across my eyes as we made our way to the Ronald Reagan Freeway to cut across Simi Valley, still at a snail's pace, a mere 20 miles per hour at most. Simi Valley always gave me the creeps. The reason they call the 118 freeway the Ronald Reagan Freeway was because old Ronnie and Nancy had a ranch out there. I imagine them riding their horses around their property, dressed in matching cowboy outfits, trying to relive their days in the movie business, consulting their astrologer for advice on how to handle the damn drugged-out hippies and communists, or having Anita Bryant over for an orange juice brunch so they could discuss how to rid the country of dykes and faggots. I cringed at the thought of having had such people in charge of our country. Twisted, power-hungry narcissists with delusions of grandeur were always rising to power in America, though. They had what it took to win the hearts and minds of the deluded masses. How anyone would want such a thing has always escaped me. Water seeks its own level, apparently, because Simi Valley is also the city where a jury of white suburban hicks and housewives saw it fit to acquit the cops that beat the living shit out of Rodney King, thereby sparking the LA riots of 1992 that left behind 60 dead and over $1 billion of destruction in its wake. We inched by past row after row of identical tract home neighborhoods, same houses, same cars in the driveways, same shopping centers, a drab and dreary nightmare of death, or more to the point, a lack of life. We hit a steep grade that slowed our speeds to around 10 miles per hour, the other side of which lay the San Fernando Valley and about the halfway point of our journey to the driver's yard in El Monte. We crossed Santa Susana Pass Road, an area that also evoked dark and morbid thoughts in my head. I remembered a friend pointing out to me once that was the exit you took off the freeway to get to Spawn Ranch, where the Manson family were squatting during the Tate LaBianca murders in the late summer of 1969. It was a jagged and rocky pass full of rattlesnakes and coyotes. Spawn Ranch sat on the edge of a wooded area called the Garden of the Gods. I thought of Manson's young devotees, spun out on speed and LSD, stalking and hiding in the night, naked and wild-eyed, having orgies on the banks of Falls Creek in nearby Devil's Canyon, while Charlie prophesied of apocalyptic race wars, proclaiming himself the living, breathing Jesus Christ and Satan, his small frame lithe and his eyes a twisted black. The lost children of America, murdering, fucking, digging shallow graves, indoctrinating young hitchhikers into their death cult in the Garden of the Gods, while strumming on beat-up guitars, singing songs of freedom. As we transitioned from the 118 to the 405 freeway, I heard a loud truck horn. I looked into the driver's side mirror and saw the driver of the car hauler's arm waving me down to pull over. I had almost forgotten he was back there asleep this whole time. I pulled off to the side of the road. He jumped down out of his cab, dressed now in a white suit jacket and slacks, pointed alligator skin shoes, and a skipper's cap, duffel bag across his shoulder, afro dripping with activator giving him that wet jerry curl look. He walked over coolly and said, "This is the end of the line for me, my man. I called my old lady. I told her to meet us right here. She's taking me back to the crib." He smelled of marijuana and cheap cologne. Just then, a white woman with blonde hair driving a white convertible Corvette pulled up and parked in front of me. He strolled over, kissed her on the mouth, climbed in, and they sped off, laughing and cranking the radio to glaring volumes. It looked like fun. They looked like fun. I drudged on through the traffic, past Griffith Park, and the stables there, housing well-groomed horses. The bigwig studio heads in nearby Burbank would buy them for their fat wives and daughters to ride when they got tired of shopping all day or taking day spas. Then on past Chavez Ravine and Dodger Stadium, slowly onto the San Bernardino Freeway, a murderous crawl in the afternoon sun, which was unseasonably hot and bright. Then onto the Santa Anita exit, every inch of the way bogged down with gridlock. I had to drive over the freeway north onto an overpass. The driver's yard was just on the other side. As I came down the other side of the overpass, I saw that there was a car stopped in the left turn lane, waiting for the light to change. The same left turn I was making into the driver's yard. I was headed downhill, fast. I started braking, but I was not slowing. The hill was very steep. I stood on the brake, again with both feet, using all my weight and strength to stop. The driver of the car at the light sat waiting patiently for the light to turn green so she could go, completely oblivious to the enormity of crushing steel barreling toward her. I reached up and pulled the horn, gripping the wheel hard, clenching my teeth, bracing myself for impact, when suddenly, and just in the nick of time, The green arrow appeared, and the driver made her turn and got clear out of my way. I followed her quickly through the light, peering into the driver's side mirror to make sure I was clearing the center island, then looking forward to turn into the first driveway on the right in a huge S formation into the yard, looking into the passenger side mirror then to make sure I was swinging wide enough to clear their gate, pulling in, straightening out, and coming to a full and final stop. I pulled out the air brakes, turned off the engine, and sat there, out of breath, nerve shot, eyes burning with exhaustion, asshole clenched, and mind spent. The mechanics in the garage came out and started toward the wrecker. They gawked in disbelief. I climbed down from the cab and wearily started unhooking from the car hauler. One of the mechanics sauntered over as I was unhooking and asked, "How the hell did you tow all that weight down here? It usually takes 2 wreckers bigger than yours to do it. That doesn't seem too safe." I didn't say anything. I just shrugged and shook my head. I was too tired to talk. Too tired to be angry with Raoul for forcing me into such a fuck situation. Too tired to stand for that matter. The other mechanics were looking at me with strange looks on their faces, shaking their heads and giggling to themselves. I didn't care to know why. As I lowered the wheel lift, I noticed that neon green hydraulic fluid was oozing from it. The weight of the car hauler was so great, it was causing the fluid in the lift to shoot out under the strain. I packed away all the chains and hoses, got in the wrecker, and pulled out of the yard. After dropping all that weight, the wrecker, which had once seemed so enormous and daunting, felt like a go-kart. I whipped out of the yard onto the street, speeding around cars, nimble and quick and free. I pulled into a Carl's Jr. to get a bite. I hadn't eaten a thing since around 9 p.m. the night prior. I started the tow at about 1:30 that morning. It was now 5:30 p.m. I sat there chuckling to myself about what I had just done, the enormity of it, the impossibility of it, the futility of life itself washed over me. I walked into the restaurant and up to the register. The girl ringing me up had that same strange look that the mechanics at the garage had had. I ordered a double cheeseburger, onion rings, and a large iced tea. I got my receipt and went to the bathroom to wash my hands. When I came to the sink to soap up my hands, I looked up into the mirror and realized what the strange looks were all about. My face was covered in a long night's worth of grease, as if I was a performing minstrel in blackface, like a train-hopping hobo who rode on top of a freight car through smoke-filled tunnels in some dusty desert. I just laughed, in that way that almost makes you cry. That hysterical way that makes you feel like you're about to short-circuit and fall to your knees. Well, I thought to myself, that's that. I better find something a bit more congenial or I'm sure as shit a dead man. I worked for Raoul for about 3 more months. I never had to tow anything so ridiculous again during those months, but I didn't want to wait around for another one to pop up. So one night under the Santa Monica Freeway in the yard where we kept the wrecker, I shook Raoul's hand and told him that I quit.